Welcome, dear friends, to a journey through sorrow and fate, where we unravel the tragedy of the Noldor through the lineage of one fateful family. In the annals of Middle-earth, the tale of the Noldor is written in blood and tears, an echo of pride and doom. Yet within this vast history, one house stands as the very heart of this sorrow, the House of Finwë. Through this single line we shall trace the rise and fall of the Noldor, from the bliss of Valinor to the torment of exile, the ruin of Beleriand and the fading of an age. The doom of the Noldor is not merely a war of swords, but of choices, of defiance and destiny intertwined. Our tale begins in Valinor, where Finwë, Lord of the Noldor, dwelt in the light of the two trees. In the early days of the world, he led his people from the awakening in Cuivianen to Aman, where the Noldor flourished under the wisdom of the Valar. Finwë had 3 sons, Fëanor, Fingolfin, and Finarfin, each destined to carve his mark upon history. Yet it was the eldest, Fëanor, who would shape the fate of his kin, for he was the greatest of all elves in skill and will, yet the most reckless in heart. It was he who wrought the Silmarils, the radiant jewels that held within them the mingled light of Lorelin and Telperion. And it was he who, through love and jealousy, set in motion a war that would span ages. But before doom fell, grief came first. Melkor, the great enemy, whispered falsehoods among the Noldor, fanning the flames of Fëanor's pride and sowing distrust among the brothers. When Finwë was slain and the Silmarils stolen, Fëanor's wrath was boundless. He swore the oath, a curse that would bind him and his sons beyond death, vowing to reclaim the Silmarils from any who would withhold them. It was this oath, terrible and unbreakable, that led to the first kinslaying at Alcolonde, where the blood of elves was first spilled by elves. The sea ran red, and the curse of Mandos fell upon the Noldor. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed. Thus, with fire in their hearts, they departed Aman, against the warnings of the Valar, and set foot upon the long exile. Yet not all followed willingly. Finarfin, seeing the horror of what had been done, turned back, and his children, save one, remained in Valinor. But Fingolfin, proud and unyielding, followed the host, though he had sworn no oath. And when Fëanor in his ruthless drive abandoned them upon the grinding ice of Helcarax, it was Fingolfin's people who endured the bitterest of trials. Across the frozen wastes where many perished, they pressed on, driven by loss and necessity, emerging in Middle-earth as a people hardened by suffering. And when Fingolfin set foot upon the lands of Beleriand beneath the rising sun, the second age of the Noldor had begun. The tragedy was now set in motion. The doom of Mandos loomed over them, and war with Morgoth would claim them one by one. Yet within this doom, each house, Fëanor's, Fingolfin's, and Finarfin's, would shape the course of history in ways none could have foreseen. In the next part of our tale, we shall follow the choices of Fingolfin and his heirs, the might of their reign, and the sorrow of their fall. The rising sun marked the arrival of Fingolfin's host in Middle-earth, and with it came both hope and vengeance. The lands of Beleriand lay before them, yet their greatest enemy, Morgoth, awaited in the north. In wrath, Fingolfin rode to the very gates of Angband, and smote upon them, naming Morgoth craven for hiding within his fortress. But war was not yet upon them. For a time the Noldor flourished, founding kingdoms of great splendor, Gondolin, Nargothrond, and Himring among them. Fingolfin, now High King of the Noldor, ruled with wisdom and strength, binding his people together in the face of their growing doom. But the doom of Mandos was not so easily cast aside, for though the Noldor had taken Beleriand by storm, the wrath of Morgoth was only biding its time. In the year 455 of the First Age, the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, erupted, and with it, the illusion of strength was shattered. Morgoth unleashed rivers of fire from the pits of Angband, and the might of the Noldor was broken. Many great lords fell in that hour. Angrod and Aegnor, the sons of Finarfin, were slain upon the slopes of Dorthonion. The valiant warriors of the north were scattered, their realms burned or overrun. It was then that Fingolfin, in despair, rode forth alone. Across the burning plains of Ardgalen he came, his eyes aflame with wrath, seeking a single combat against Morgoth himself. No force in Middle-earth could stop him, for the fear of the Elven King was upon them. And so, before the doors of Angband, Fingolfin called out, naming Morgoth a coward, challenging him to single combat. And Morgoth came. The duel was a thing of legend. Though Morgoth was the mightiest of the Valar, his strength had been diminished by his own evil. Before him stood Fingolfin, clad in silver, wielding Ringil, his sword shining like ice. 3 times he struck Morgoth, and 3 times the Dark Lord bellowed in pain. But in the end, it was doom that claimed the king of the Noldor. Morgoth's hammer groaned, rent the earth, and with each blow, Fingolfin leapt aside, until at last he stumbled. Morgoth set his foot upon the Elf Lord's neck, yet even then Fingolfin hewed at his foe, driving his blade deep into the Dark Lord's flesh. So fierce was the duel that Morgoth never fully recovered from his wounds, and thus Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, fell. His body taken up by Thorondor, Lord of Eagles, so that it would not be defiled by the enemy. But his line did not end. His son, Turgon, had already withdrawn to the hidden city of Gondolin, where he would forge a legacy in secret, and his younger son, Fingon, now bore the crown of the Noldor, inheriting not only the kingdom, but the sorrow of his father's fate. Under his rule, the Noldor sought once more to rise against Morgoth, but the doom of Mandos had not finished its work. It was in the Nirnai Arnoiat, the battle of unnumbered tears, that Fingon, like his father before him, met his end. Betrayed by the treachery of men, the forces of Morgoth surrounded him. He fought until the last, and when the Balrog Gothmog struck him down, the Noldor lost their greatest hope. Yet, in one last defiance of fate, one of Fingon's kin still stood. Turgon, king of Gondolin, had not marched to open war, nor had he taken the oath of Feanor. His city remained hidden, its gates barred, and in its secret halls the last hope of the Noldor endured. For it was there that the bloodline of Fingolfin, and with it the fate of Middle-earth, would find its final purpose. But what doom awaited Gondolin? What fate still wove its threads around the house of Finwë? In the next part of our tale, we shall follow the last kings of the Noldor, the fall of their final stronghold, and the hope that arose from ruin. Though the sons of Fingolfin had fallen in battle, the line of Finwë was not yet extinguished. Far from the ruin of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, hidden behind the encircling mountains, stood Gondolin, the last great kingdom of the Noldor. Turgon, son of Fingolfin, had labored long in secret to raise its shining towers, a city fashioned in the likeness of Tirion upon Tuna as a memory of lost Valinor. For centuries it stood untouched, a beacon of hope in the shadow of Morgoth's dominion. Yet the doom of Mandos was patient, and even the might of Gondolin could not defy fate forever. It was through Maeglin, Turgon's own nephew, that treachery crept into the city's heart. Born of Aredthel, Turgon's sister, and the dark-hearted Eol, Maeglin had grown bitter in secret, coveting Idrel, the king's daughter, though her heart was bound to another. And so, when fate led Maeglin into Morgoth's grasp, the Dark Lord twisted his mind with promises of power. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps destiny, Maeglin betrayed Gondolin's location, and the doom of the city was. In the year 510 of the First Age, Morgoth unleashed his full might against Gondolin. Balrogs, dragons, and countless legions of orcs poured into the hidden valley, and the city that had stood for centuries fell in a single night of fire and death. Turgon, defiant to the end, refused to abandon his people and perished amid the ruins of his palace. Maeglin, traitor and kinslayer, sought to take Idril by force, but Tuor, her husband, cast him from the walls to his doom. In the end, only a few survived. The exiles of Gondolin, led by Tuor and Idril, bearing with them their young son, Earendil. With the fall of Gondolin, the doom of the Noldor seemed complete. Of Finwë's house, only a few now remained. Gil-galad, son of Fingon, who had taken refuge on Valar. Galadriel, the daughter of Finarfin, who had forsaken war and sought wisdom in exile. And Eärendil, who carried in his veins the mingled blood of elves and men. Yet even in the darkest hour, the fate of Middle-earth still turned upon the choices of Finwë's descendant. Eärendil, raised in the wreckage of lost kingdoms, grew to manhood, burdened by the sorrow of his people. When he wedded Elwing, granddaughter of Luthien, the bloodlines of the greatest houses of elves and men were united. But the oath of Feanor had not yet run its course. The surviving sons of Feanor, Maedhros and Maglor, sought to claim the last Silmaril, which Elwing bore. They came in wrath, and another kinslaying darkened the pages of history. Yet Elwing, rather than surrender the jewel, cast herself into the sea. And by the grace of Ulmo, she was born to Eärendil, who had long sought a way to Valinor. Thus, upon his ship Vingalar, Eärendil defied the ban of the Valar and sailed into the Undying Lands, the first of mortal kind to do so. He came not as a warrior, nor as a king, but as a herald, pleading for the salvation of Middle-earth. And the Valar listened. Moved by his sacrifice, they gathered their might, and the final war against Morgoth began. The War of Wrath shattered the lands of Beleriand, and at last the Dark Lord was thrown down. Morgoth was cast into the void, and the Silmarils were lost to the depths of the world. Yet for the Noldor, there was no true victory. Beleriand was drowned, their great cities were no more, and their people were scattered. The Valar offered pardon to those who remained, yet many refused, choosing exile in Middle-earth rather than returning in shame. Thus, the tragedy of the Noldor was fulfilled. Once the mightiest of the elves, they were now a fading people, their pride humbled, their kingdoms lost. Gil-galad would become the last High King, presiding over the twilight of his kind. But from the ruin of their lineage arose a new hope, for Eärendil's sons Elrond and Elros were given a choice, to be counted among elves or men. In them, the fate of Middle-earth would be forever changed, for through Elros, the line of Númenor was born, and through Elrond, the blood of the Noldor would flow into the last hope of the free peoples. But even in this, the shadow of their past lingered. The oath of Feanor, the kinslayings, the pride that led them to exile, all remained as echoes in the ages that followed. The Noldor had sought to defy fate, to forge their own destiny, yet, in the end, they were bound by it. And so the tale of Finwë's house came to its final turning, not in the glory of their making, but in the passing of an age. The tale of the Noldor is one of brilliance and sorrow, of greatness marred by tragedy, of beauty cast into shadow by the weight of its own pride. From the light of the two trees to the ruin of Beleriand, the descendants of Finwë walked a path strewn with glory and grief, and their choices shaped the fate of Middle-earth in ways they could scarcely have foreseen. Yet, in the end, their story is not simply one of loss, but of transformation. For all their might, the Noldor could not escape the doom of Mandos. Their exile from Valinor was not merely a punishment, but a lesson, written in fire and blood. Feanor, the greatest of them all, burned too brightly, and his flame consumed all that he had wrought. His oath drove his sons to despair, turning them from noble lords into outcasts and kinslayers. Fingolfin and Fingon stood as beacons of nobility and courage, yet even they could not turn the tide. Turgon sought to preserve the legacy of his people, but Gondolin, the fairest of cities, was doomed to fall. And in the end, it was not the wrath of Morgoth, but the divided hearts of the Noldor themselves that sealed their fate. Yet, amid the ruin, something new was born. The legacy of the Noldor did not end with the fall of their kingdoms. Through Eärendil's sacrifice, the Valar were moved to act, and the long war against Morgoth was finally won. His sons, Elrond and Elros, carried the blood of the Noldor into the future, forging the paths of both elves and men. Elros founded Númenor, the mightiest realm of men, whose legacy would echo down to the days of Aragorn, the last heir of Isildur. Elrond, in turn, became a guardian of wisdom, standing at the crossroads of ages, preserving the memory of his kin, even as they faded into legend. The tragedy of the Noldor is, at its heart, the tragedy of all who seek to defy fate, of all who strive for greatness, yet fall to their own flaws. It is the story of ambition turned to folly, of love twisted into obsession, of valor consumed by vengeance. And yet, it is also a story of hope, of lessons learned, of sacrifices made, and of a world forever changed by their deeds. As the ages passed, the Noldor dwindled, their power waning as the world moved beyond them. By the time of the War of the Ring, few remained, and their once great dominion had become but a whisper in history. Yet in that whisper lay the echoes of their glory, the memory of a people who dared to challenge a god, who suffered for their pride, yet endured beyond their downfall. When the last ship sailed from the Grey Havens, carrying the last of the Eldar into the west, the story of the Noldor finally came to its end. But their legacy lived on, woven into the fabric of Middle-earth itself. Thus we come to the end of our journey, having walked the path of Finwë's line from light to shadow, from triumph to tragedy. The tale of the Noldor is a mirror of our own struggles, of the price of ambition, of the weight of our choices, and of the hope that lingers even in the face of loss. And so, as we look upon the history of Middle-earth, let us remember them, not only for their sorrow, but for the fire that once burned within them. A fire that, though dimmed, was never truly extinguished.